From a director fired mid-production to racist locals sabotaging scenes with deliberate noise, the making of this NASCAR biopic proved almost as dramatic as the races it depicted. The first African-American driver's historic victory wasn't the only groundbreaking story. The film itself became a battlefield of Hollywood controversies, real-life romance, and a trophy that wouldn't be awarded for 58 years. Fact 1. The real Wendell Scott never got his trophy. When Wendell Scott crossed the finish line first at the Jacksonville Speedway in Florida on December 1, 1963, he made history as the first African-American driver to win a NASCAR Grand National Series race. But instead of celebrating in victory lane, Scott watched as race officials handed the trophy to Buck Baker, a popular white driver who had actually finished in second place. The officials claimed there had been a scoring error and that Baker was the winner, even though Scott had lapped the entire field twice and finished a full 202 laps compared to Baker's 200. Buck Baker went to victory lane, posed for photos with the white trophy queen, spoke with reporters, and then drove home to North Carolina with the winner's trophy in hand. Hours later, deep into the night after the crowd had gone home and the track had emptied out, NASCAR officials finally admitted that Scott had indeed won the race. They gave him the winner's check for $1,000, but the trophy was already gone. Scott confronted Baker about it, telling him he could keep the trophy queen kiss, but the trophy belonged to him. 4 weeks later, Scott received a small, cheap wooden trophy with no engravings that eventually fell apart. The original trophy was never seen again. Scott died from spinal cancer in 1990, and his family continued asking NASCAR for the trophy he deserved. It wasn't until August of 2021, nearly 58 years after the race and 31 years after Scott's death, that NASCAR finally presented his family with a replica trophy at Daytona International Speedway, just one day before what would have been Scott's 100th birthday. Fact 2. Director fired and replaced mid-production. The film Greased Lightning had a dramatic change in leadership that happened right in the middle of production, creating tension behind the scenes that rivaled anything happening on screen. Melvin Van Peebles, the groundbreaking filmmaker who had created the influential movie Sweet Sweetback's Badasses song just 6 years earlier, was originally hired to direct the Wendell Scott biopic and also served as one of the screenwriters. Van Peebles brought his signature bold and stylized approach to the project, planning to tell Scott's story with the same rebellious energy and anti-establishment attitude that had made his previous films so powerful. But Warner Brothers, the studio distributing the film, had different ideas about what they wanted. According to news reports from August of 1976, the studio orchestrated Van Peebles' removal from the director's chair and brought in Michael Schultz, who had just directed the successful films Cooley High and Car Wash. When Van Peebles spoke to reporters about his departure, he explained that the studio wanted something more conventional and mainstream. He stated that his version was more stylized, while they wanted it more naturalistic. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved, since Van Peebles' rebellious anti-authority sensibilities had already been woven into the early scenes of the screenplay, particularly the moonshine running sequences that open the film. Richard Pryor, who was already attached to star as Wendell Scott, personally asked Schultz to take over the project. Despite the change in directors and the creative differences that caused it, Van Peebles retained his screenwriting credit, and his influence can still be felt throughout the finished film. Fact 3. Racist locals sabotaged filming with strategic noise. Filming Greased Lightning in rural Georgia during the summer of 1976 brought the cast and crew face-to-face with the same kind of racism that Wendell Scott himself had experienced throughout his racing career. The production shot scenes in multiple Georgia locations, including Madison, Athens, Winder, and Byron, and at several of these locations, the predominantly black cast and crew encountered serious resistance from local white residents who didn't want them there. The locals came up with a clever but cruel way to disrupt the production without getting into direct confrontations. They figured out that if they waited until they heard director Michael Schultz yell the word action to start a take, they could immediately begin making loud noises like banging on things, shouting, or revving engines. This would ruin the audio for the scene and force the production to stop and start over again, wasting time and money. The sabotage happened repeatedly enough that it became a serious problem that threatened to derail the entire shoot. But Schultz came up with an ingenious solution that turned the tables on the saboteurs. He simply reversed his commands during filming. Instead of yelling, "Action" to start a take, he would yell, "Cut." And instead of yelling "Cut" to end a take, he would yell, "Action." This meant that whenever the locals heard what they thought was the signal to start making noise, the cameras had already captured the scene and the take was safely in the can. By the time they realized what was happening and started making their disruptive sounds, it was too late to ruin anything. Schultz's clever workaround allowed the production to continue despite the hostile environment. Fact 4. Richard Pryor and Pam Grier fell in love on set. The on-screen chemistry between Richard Pryor and Pam Grier in Greased Lightning wasn't just acting. The two stars fell deeply in love during the production and began a passionate but troubled relationship that would last for years. They met while filming the movie in 1976, with Pryor playing pioneering NASCAR driver Wendell Scott and Grier playing his supportive wife Mary. The relationship was intense from the start, and Grier later described herself as being genuinely in love with Pryor. She even helped him learn to read, since he had struggled with illiteracy throughout his life, despite his massive success as a comedian and actor. The couple dated seriously for years after the film wrapped, and at one point they were planning to get married. Grier bought a wedding dress and made all the arrangements for their ceremony. But the day before their wedding was supposed to take place, Pryor eloped with another woman named Deborah McGuire, completely blindsiding Grier and breaking her heart. In interviews decades later, Grier spoke openly about how devastating the betrayal had been. She had invested years of her life trying to help Pryor overcome his demons and addiction problems. But in the end, she couldn't save him from himself. The relationship ended abruptly with that shocking elopement, though Grier maintained that she cared deeply about Pryor and wished things could have been different. Years after their breakup, when Pryor famously set himself on fire in 1980 while freebasing cocaine, Grier was contacted and asked to visit him in the hospital, but she refused to go, saying she had nothing left to say to him. Fact 5. Pryor lost Blazing Saddles' role to his co-star. One of the strangest connections between the cast members of Greased Lightning involves a role that Richard Pryor never got to play, even though he helped create it. 3 years before Greased Lightning was filmed, Pryor worked as one of the screenwriters on Mel Brooks' comedy Western Blazing Saddles, which came out in 1974. Pryor co-wrote the sharp, satirical screenplay that turned racial stereotypes upside down and became one of the most controversial comedies of its era. Brooks specifically had Pryor in mind to play the lead role of Sheriff Bart, the black lawman who takes over a racist Western town. But when it came time to actually cast the film, 20th Century Fox, the studio financing the project, refused to approve Pryor for the part. The official reason given was that the studio was concerned about Pryor's history of drug-related arrests and his reputation for unpredictable behavior. They worried he was too much of a risk for such a major production. So despite having co-written the screenplay and despite being Brooks' first choice for the starring role, Pryor was shut out of the movie entirely, except for his writing credit. The role of Sheriff Bart went instead to a Broadway actor named Cleavon Little, who gave a brilliant performance that earned him a BAFTA nomination. 3 years later, Pryor and Little found themselves working together again as co-stars in Greased Lightning, with Little playing Pee-wee, Wendell Scott's best friend and partner in Moonshine Running. While Little got the role of Sheriff Bart that Pryor had co-created, at least Pryor finally got his own starring vehicle in Greased Lightning. Fact 6. Civil rights icon Julian Bond had an acting role. Greased Lightning featured an unexpected appearance by one of the most important civil rights leaders of the 20th century, though you might miss him if you weren't paying close attention. Julian Bond, who co-founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as Sneaky during the sit-in movement of the early 1960s, appears in the film playing a character named Russell, one of Wendell Scott's friends. Bond was a genuine hero of the civil rights movement who had organized voter registration campaigns throughout the South, fought against segregation, and later served for 20 years in the Georgia state legislature. By 1977, when Greased Lightning was released, Bond had become chairman of the NAACP, one of the most powerful positions in Black America. His appearance in the film was one of his rare acting roles, though he did occasionally dabble in entertainment throughout his life. In fact, 1977 turned out to be a busy year for Bond in Hollywood. Just a few months after Greased Lightning came out, Bond became the first black political figure to host Saturday Night Live, appearing on the show in April of that year. He brought his intelligence and dignity to both the film and the television appearance, helping to broaden the representation of African Americans in mainstream entertainment beyond just actors and entertainers. Bond's willingness to appear in Greased Lightning also showed his commitment to telling important stories about Black achievement and perseverance. Having a real civil rights icon in the cast added an extra layer of authenticity to this film about a man who had broken racial barriers in his own way. Fact 7. Woodstock legend both scored and acted in the film. Richie Havens, the legendary folk singer who became famous for opening the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, played a dual role in bringing Greased Lightning to life. Havens didn't just contribute to the film's soundtrack, he actually appeared on screen as an actor playing Woodrow, the skilled mechanic who helps Wendell Scott repair his race car after he decides to pursue NASCAR. Havens had one of the most distinctive voices in folk music, with a deep, gravelly sound that audiences recognized instantly. At Woodstock, he had played for over 2 hours, much longer than planned, because he was the only performer who had actually made it to the festival site while everyone else was stuck in traffic. He ended up improvising his most famous song, Freedom, on the spot when he ran out of material. By the time Greased Lightning was being made, Havens had transitioned into acting and had already appeared in stage productions and films. His role as Woodrow gave him a chance to act alongside Richard Pryor while also composing and performing music for the film's soundtrack. The combination of Havens's soulful folk music and his on-screen presence added an extra layer of authenticity to the movie. His music helped set the tone for Wendell Scott's journey from moonshine runner to NASCAR champion, imbuing even the most routine biographical scenes with a sense of dignity and purpose. Havens continued acting sporadically throughout the 1980s and 90s, appearing in other films and television shows, but Greased Lightning remained one of his most memorable film roles, allowing him to combine both of his talents in a single project. Fact 8. The real Wendell Scott built the movie's race car. When it came time to film the racing sequences for Greased Lightning, the production didn't have to rely on Hollywood prop masters to create a fake version of Wendell Scott's famous race car. They had the real thing, built by the man himself. Wendell Scott served as the technical advisor for the film, bringing his decades of NASCAR experience and mechanical expertise to ensure the movie got the details right. As part of his work on the production, Scott personally constructed a replica of his iconic number 34 1962 Chevrolet, the car he had driven during his prime years on the racing circuit. Scott built the replica specifically for use in the film, painstakingly recreating the modifications and characteristics that had made his original race car so effective on dirt tracks and paved speedways throughout the South. The custom-built Chevrolet Impala featured the same stock car modifications that Scott had used during the 1960s, giving the racing scenes an authenticity that would have been impossible to achieve otherwise. Scott didn't just build the car and walk away, he also performed many of the driving stunts himself during filming, showing that even in his 50s, he still had the skills that had made him a champion. The replica race car that Scott built for the movie has become a treasured piece of NASCAR history. After the film was completed, the car eventually made its way to the NASCAR Hall of Fame in Charlotte, North Carolina, where it remains on display today. Visitors to the Hall of Fame can see the actual vehicle that appeared in the movie, complete with Scott's number 34 on the doors, serving as a lasting tribute to both his racing legacy and his contribution to this film. Fact 9. Scott was disappointed with Hollywood stunt drivers. Despite Wendell Scott's crucial role in making Greased Lightning as authentic as possible, his experience working on the film left him frustrated and feeling exploited. Scott served as the technical consultant and performed many of the dangerous driving stunts himself, bringing real NASCAR expertise to sequences that could have easily looked fake if left to Hollywood professionals. But according to later interviews, Scott received very little financial compensation for all his work on the production, even though his contributions were essential to making the racing scenes believable. What bothered Scott even more than the low pay was his disappointment with the professional stunt drivers that the production had hired for some of the racing sequences. These were supposedly expert drivers who made their living performing dangerous stunts for movies, but Scott was utterly unimpressed with their abilities behind the wheel. In his characteristically blunt manner, Scott told interviewers that the stunt drivers couldn't even drive a car, and that they were the worst thing he had ever seen in his life. For a man who had competed in 495 NASCAR races over 13 years, driving against some of the greatest drivers in motorsports history, to say that Hollywood's supposedly professional stunt drivers were incompetent must have been particularly galling. Scott had spent his entire career battling prejudice and proving that he belonged on the track with white drivers. And now here he was, watching people who couldn't hold a candle to his skills getting paid more than he was. The experience highlighted the gap between real racing expertise and Hollywood's version of it, and it left Scott feeling undervalued despite his irreplaceable contributions to the film. Fact 10. The film changed Scott's historic victory date. Greased Lightning took significant liberties with the true timeline of Wendell Scott's racing career, altering key dates and inventing dramatic events that never actually happened. The most notable change involves Scott's historic NASCAR victory at Jacksonville Speedway in Florida. In reality, Scott won that groundbreaking race on December 1, 1963, becoming the first African-American driver to win at NASCAR's highest level. But the film depicts this victory as happening in 1965, moving it forward by 2 full years. The screenplay made this change to compress Scott's career into a more streamlined narrative that would work better for a 96-minute movie. But the film went even further in rewriting history with its dramatic ending. In May of 1973, Scott was involved in a devastating crash at Talladega Superspeedway in Alabama during an event known as the Big One. 21 cars were involved in the massive pileup on the backstretch, and Scott suffered severe injuries, including broken legs. That crash effectively ended his racing career. He never competed again and spent his final years running an automobile repair shop in Danville, Virginia, before dying of spinal cancer in 1990. But Greased Lightning completely rewrites this tragic ending. In the film, Scott has his Talladega crash, but then makes a triumphant comeback, recovering from his injuries and returning to win a major Grand National Championship race against his rival, Bo Wells. The movie ends with Scott being hoisted on his crew's shoulders, waving the checkered flag in victory as crowds cheer. It's a Hollywood ending designed to leave audiences feeling inspired, but it bears no resemblance to what actually happened to the real Wendell Scott. Fact 11. Pryor met Greer through the man she was dating. The romantic relationship between Richard Pryor and Pam Grier that blossomed during the filming of Greased Lightning had an awkward beginning that involved another famous comedian. Pryor first met Grier through Freddie Prinze, the young Puerto Rican comedian who was starring in the hit television sitcom Chico and the Man and rapidly becoming one of the biggest names in comedy. Prinze and Grier were dating at the time, and Prinze introduced his girlfriend to his friend and fellow comedian Pryor at some point in the mid-1970s. The introduction was innocent enough, just one comedian introducing his colleague to his girlfriend. But later, when both Pryor and Greer were cast in Greased Lightning and began spending time together on set in Georgia, the attraction between them became undeniable. They didn't start their romance immediately after meeting through Prince, but once they were working together every day on the film set, playing husband and wife on screen, their relationship shifted from friendly to romantic. By the time filming was underway, Greer had ended things with Prince and had begun her intense, complicated relationship with Pryor. The timing of these events was particularly tragic because Freddie Prinze was struggling with severe depression and cocaine addiction. In January of 1977, just months after Greased Lightning had finished filming, Prince died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at the age of 22. Greer was one of the last people he spoke to before his death, though they were no longer romantically involved by that point. The connection between these three talented performers, Prince, Pryor, and Greer, ended up being marked by tragedy and heartbreak. Circa 12. The film came out a year before Grease. When most people hear the title Greased Lightning today, their first thought is often of the famous song Greased Lightnin' from the musical Grease, starring John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. The similarity in titles leads many people to assume that the Wendell Scott biopic was either trying to capitalize on the success of Grease or was somehow related to it. But the timeline proves that assumption completely wrong. Greased Lightning, the Richard Pryor film about NASCAR pioneer Wendell Scott, hit theaters on July 1, 1977. It was a summer release distributed by Warner Brothers, and it came out when Pryor was at the height of his popularity following his success in Silver Streak the previous year. Meanwhile, the movie version of Grease, based on the Broadway musical of the same name, didn't premiere until June 16, 1978, nearly a full year. After Greased Lightning had already come and gone from theaters. So not only did the NASCAR biopic come first, but it beat Grease to theaters by almost 12 full months. The title Greased Lightning was entirely original to the Wendell Scott film and had nothing to do with the musical about 1950s high school students. The term Greased Lightning is actually an old American idiom meaning something that moves extremely fast, which made it a perfect title for a movie about a race car driver. The phrase dates back to at least the 1800s and appears in various American folk sayings and songs. So when the Greased Lightning filmmakers chose their title in 1976, they were drawing on traditional American language, not copying from Grease, which wouldn't become a cultural phenomenon until a year later. Fact 13. Atlanta's first black mayor had a cameo. Greased Lightning featured a meaningful cameo appearance by a genuine trailblazer in Southern politics who was making history in real time while the film was being made. Maynard Jackson Jr., who had made history by becoming Atlanta's first African-American mayor in 1974, appears in the movie as the minister who officiates the wedding ceremony between Wendell Scott and Mary Joan. Jackson's presence in the film wasn't just a random bit of stunt casting. It was a deliberate choice that connected Scott's pioneering achievements in NASCAR to the broader story of African Americans breaking barriers throughout Southern society. Jackson had won his historic election during the height of the Civil Rights era, becoming mayor of one of the most important cities in the South at a time when black political leadership was still relatively rare. His victory represented a seismic shift in Southern politics and helped establish Atlanta as a progressive city that would become known as the Black Capital of America. By 1976, when Greased Lightning was filming in Georgia, Jackson was still in his first term as mayor and was working to transform Atlanta's economy and increase opportunities for black-owned businesses. Having someone of Jackson's stature appear in the film, even in a small role, added weight and authenticity to this story about another African-American pioneer who had succeeded in an all-white world. Jackson's cameo as the wedding minister is brief, but his presence serves as a reminder that Wendell Scott's story wasn't just about racing. It was part of a larger narrative about Black Americans fighting for recognition and equality in every aspect of American life during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Fact 14. Greer ended the romance over cocaine concerns. The relationship between Richard Pryor and Pam Greer came to a devastating end because of Pryor's severe cocaine addiction, but the way Greer discovered the full extent of the problem was particularly shocking. In her 2010 memoir titled Foxy, My Life in 3 Acts, Greer revealed intimate details about why she finally had to walk away from the man she loved. During a routine medical examination, Greer's doctor discovered something alarming. There was a buildup of cocaine residue around her cervix and vagina. The doctor, who treated many patients in Beverly Hills, told Greer that this was becoming an epidemic among women whose partners were using cocaine. The doctor explained that the drug was being transmitted to Greer through intimate contact with Pryor, either because he was applying cocaine directly to his skin or, more likely, because the cocaine was present in his seminal fluid from his heavy use. When Greer confronted Pryor about the situation and told him he needed to wear protection during sex to keep her safe, Pryor refused. He had an issue with using condoms, and despite Greer explaining that the cocaine residue could harm her internal organs, he wouldn't change his behavior. That refusal became the final breaking point for Greer. She had already spent years trying to help Pryor overcome his addiction, supporting him through his struggles and attempting to guide him toward sobriety. But she realized that she couldn't sacrifice her own health and safety while trying to save someone who wouldn't help himself. In later interviews, Greer spoke about how painful it was to watch Pryor squander his incredible talent and all the opportunities Hollywood was offering him. Opportunities that she, as a Black woman, would never receive. Fact 15. The movie depicts a victory that never happened. The climactic ending of Greased Lightning delivers exactly what audiences want from a Hollywood biopic, a triumphant victory that validates all the struggle and sacrifice the hero has endured. In the film's final sequence, Wendell Scott suffers a serious crash at Talladega Superspeedway that leaves him badly injured, and his wife Mary begs him to retire from racing, but Scott refuses to give up on his dream. He prepares for one final major race, and his old friend Hutch, played by Beau Bridges, leaves a rival team to rejoin Scott's crew out of respect for his determination. During the climactic race against his longtime rival, Bo Wells, Scott makes a rushed pit stop and leaves with only 3 lug nuts properly secured on one of his rear tires. Despite the wobbling wheel, he races aggressively through the final 20 laps and crosses the finish line first, finally winning the major championship he's been chasing. The movie ends with Scott hoisted triumphantly on his crew's shoulders, waving the checkered flag as massive crowds cheer his victory. It's an inspiring, uplifting conclusion that suggests Scott's perseverance was ultimately rewarded, but none of it actually happened. In real life, Scott's career-ending crash at Talladega occurred on May 3, 1973, during an event called the Winston 500. The crash, which involved 21 cars, left Scott with severe injuries, including broken legs, and he never competed in another NASCAR race. There was no triumphant comeback, no final victory, no championship celebration. Scott spent the rest of his life running an automobile garage in Danville, Virginia, until spinal cancer forced him to stop working. He died on December 23, 1990, 17 years after that crash ended his racing career.